Glad to have you here. This is Wednesday Night Sessions, of course. I am your host, Mitch Nobis, as always. Tonight's episode is a big treat for me. We've been trying to put this one together for kind of a while, I think, actually. Tonight we have Hanif Abdurraqib, who is a poet and essayist and just writer extraordinaire, one of my favorites, a legitimate genius. He won a MacArthur Genius Grant. So you always got to slide that in whenever you can. I would anyways. And as I was just telling him on the show, I usually kind of duck out to save bandwidth. So I will toss it over to Hanif and let him introduce himself and kind of tell us what's going on. And then I will bounce back in after he's done reading and ask a couple of questions. So Hanif, take it away. The floor is yours.
Cool. Thank you for having me. I'm going to read two poems real quick, and then I'm going to try to read something from my next book. All the TV shows are about cops. Leadbelly wrote a tune to the mayor and sang his way out the joint, but not before some motherfucker. Oh, wait. Am I allowed to curse?
Go for it.
Oh, great. Okay. These poems have curse words. Or at least this one does. All the TV shows are about cops. Let's take it from the top. Leadbelly wrote a tune to the mayor and sang his way out the joint, but not before some motherfucker with a death wish took a knife across Leadbelly's neck and almost got carried out in a box. There ain't but too many ways to leave a cage, though, and I suppose if you got the kind of trouble that won't walk you out, then you got to chase after what made them boys on the outside fear you in the first place. And I think of this when I am deciding what to make of the scene where the cop sits in the back of the blues club and goes limp, collapses into the red leather of a lonely corner booth. The right singer can make any blues song a cage where the only way out is a procession of black cars and black suits, and the cop weeps into his palm while the singer unfurls a song about a man who is marching towards a bullet or the edge of a knife. And I think the trick is that we are supposed to believe this architect of death can recognize the shape of what's coming, that a heart hums beneath the shined up metal. The best blues songs are sung by liars and then make liars of listeners, make mayors believe in changed men who sing with blades dancing beneath their tongues. The song, like the blade itself, an instrument of both dissection and reconstruction, depending on the hands, depending on the intention of the composer. What am I to believe the cop knows of a violence this tender, even as he trembles, even as he folds into his own loneliness like a note pleading for mercy passed through bars? The first sentence of this poem is also the first line. Watching the Notorious Big's funeral procession for the 17th time, I can't help but notice the white wings of the dove and its aimless twirling above the black whips pouring slow down the block, and the wrists occasionally flung from their tinted windows, white diamonds ascending towards the off-white sky. And in a moment, no longer than the exit of a half-drawn breath, the dove finds itself above a car with its trunk open and overrun with a chorus of soft white roses. And it is here, I swear, I cannot tell where the feathers end and the petals begin, to say nothing of the clouds, which in this joyous exhale of a second are delighting in the marriage of all this fluorescent white, high stepping down the aisles and locking fingers with the smoke blown from the mouths of the black folks, dancing atop cop cars and shaking the fences of the check cashing spot. There are graves we do not dance upon, but they are certainly not these. And there are two black boys dangling out of a high-rise window, their mouths open and dark as solar systems, their hands pointing in awe at this confluence of small and clumsy heavens stumbling towards each other. Perhaps as in awe as I am now, or as I was then, when the dope boys came back to the block in summer, and their white car doors flung towards the sky, a fleet of divine hunting birds lined up along the basketball courts, Biggie's voice pummeling the wall of humid air. The song says, somebody gotta die, but doesn't say who, doesn't say where, doesn't name the street people will push their closed fists into while the wheels of a hearse stumble along a plague of potholes. The song suggests death as a necessity. Be grateful there is still enough earth to be buried under and a set of hands that might love you enough to do the digging. The casket weighs the same no matter who rests inside of it. I propose that death itself is the weight, which is what you might say to me now to make sense of why I cannot lift the box that holds what is left of your ashes, but easily raised you on my shoulders when we were young and light as feathers, stretching up towards the branches and taking what we could from abandoned nests. All right, I have, for those who are later watching this, forgive my turn away from here to here, but I have my book up on my monitor because I'm literally writing it. And so I'm going to read something from my next book, which is called There's Always This Year, which won't be out for like 2 years, but you can hear a little bit of it now. I don't know. I don't. It's kind of about basketball, but not really. Which I always say that basketball is a container that a lot of other things are happening in. Um, I will say that this is a part. I'm going to read just a small section of a part that is about the chase down block in the 2016 NBA Finals, but is also about 1976 in Cleveland, where there was a mob war that led to the city just being saturated with car bombings, just like car bombings all the time. And so I'm playing with this idea of that which people can't see coming. And I'm going to read a little part of that. In 1976, 36 bombs went off in Cleveland. The news dubbed it Bomb City, USA. Bombing itself wasn't new. The car bomb had long been one of the methods used to dispose of enemies. It left no evidence, but it was also loud, drew attention, and wasn't especially easy to execute. Pulling a trigger or even drawing a knife across a throat took less work, but also didn't always send a message. And in Cleveland in 1976, power would be achieved by the sending of messages. So the city was alight with bombs through the summer and into the fall. Cars being transformed into hills of jagged and glowing metal. Whatever bodies were inside of them sometimes rendered unrecognizable depending on the immediacy of the explosion. And all of this would happen out in the open, in broad daylight. The mob was becoming populated with younger, more reckless enforcers. And when a city is rattled by explosions in an infinity cycle of retaliation so vicious, it can hardly be remembered what its starting point or end goal is. Even those who aren't targets become targets. A person walking next to a car that goes up in flames could become collateral if the explosion does enough damage. Fear screams through a city, and a city rearranges its DNA, no matter how the scent of promise and jubilation spun through the air before it was torn apart by fear's screaming. The bomb relies on the trick we have turned over in our palms here many times already. The bomb relies on the fact that a person cannot see it coming, at least not the person who might most want to see it coming, the person with their name scrawled into the afterlife of its detonation, even if you know yourself to be a target, even if you have stitched the kind of awareness into your DNA that comes with living through a city being torn apart by explosions, you will never know exactly when the flash of hot light will come for you. And I can only imagine if I were not me, but someone else, someone marked for death in a city humming with panic, I would simply embrace this lack of knowing. At first, I would maybe frantically check my car or underneath my porch in the mornings, and then I would have to give in to the fact that what was out to get me might eventually just catch my ass. Understanding what would come for you and being able to see it coming are two separate parts of the same machine, but I know what would allow me to put a key into ignition without closing my eyes and holding my breath. I know it would allow me to sleep easy, or at least easy enough. What with sleep being the relative that shepherds us towards some eternal forest garlanded with shadows, it isn't that the victim can't see what's coming, but the distant witness can. I would like to pause here briefly to consider devotion. The kind of devotion it might take, for example, to extend your open palm so that someone you love or are otherwise beholden to might drop their car keys into your hand. The kind of devotion it might take, for example, to start a car that is not your car in a time and place where the car itself was a weapon, and therefore the key nudged into the ignition was an extension of that weapon. What it might take for you to drive around a block a couple times knowing that someone, somewhere, not far from where your palms sweat against the steering wheel's leather, might be holding a small device with a single red button. And I know this isn't entirely romantic. I know that fear can also be one of devotion's many mothers, but maybe someone you have grown to love is more afraid than you are. And maybe you take their keys from them, pull them out of a hand without mentioning the hands shaking. I would like to consider the ways we all march to our sometimes boring deaths without understanding what it is to be so devoted to someone or something that you might be compelled to speed up that march so that they can continue their own. I am not here to consider what is good or what is bad, but simply to consider what is sometimes necessary, even if I don't have the heart for it. I only have the heart for far inferior devotions. So does everyone I love. There maybe just aren't enough people who want us dead.
Man. Thank you so much for that sneak preview of the next book. That was outstanding.
Yeah, I feel like there are people who like don't know the history of Cleveland bombings, but it's a wild history. It's like yeah, it took a lot to not just make the whole first section about the history of Cleveland bombings in the 70s, because it's just much like A Little Devil in America, where I found out, or I like dove into the history of the dance marathon, and that kind of unlocked a lot for me. Diving into the history of Cleveland's mob wars unlocked a lot for me here.
I bet. I mean, I feel like maybe it's just because as we were talking before I hit record, we're in Metro Detroit up here. I feel like all of us kind of Rust Belt, Great Migration cities have some kind of story along those lines. Like Detroit's are kind of obvious with the riots, but
yeah,
there aren't a lot of us northern industrial cities that don't have some moments in the 60s or 70s where things got dicey, I guess.
For sure.
Awesome. Well, as I was telling you, we do try to keep the show fairly brief, I guess. So as I was telling one of the other people that'll be on this season, the hardest thing for me as a host is trying to figure out which question to ask, because I could ask literally 500 different questions based on what you just read. But a lot of our viewers are writers themselves or art supporters, and so they're always kind of curious about the behind the scenes part. And so a lot of your writing gets into pop culture, and like you mentioned, basketball is a vehicle to somewhere else. You also write about music a lot. You read the poem that kind of circulates around Biggie Smalls. How do I phrase this? So this is a writing question. How do these different elements find their way into your writing? And as somebody who writes in different genres a little bit myself, I'm also curious, like, how do you know when one's headed towards a poem versus this is going to be an essay? Like, how to give us kind of a sneak peek behind the early part of your process?
Well, in the earliest part, I don't know at all, which is good. I tend to not know until I'm like halfway through a draft. And even then, I kind of like to see a draft through to fruition, a draft of a long form piece or a poem. A great example of this is that in A Fortune for Your Disaster, there's a poem about Mary Clayton. In that poem was the first draft of what would later become the essay about Mary Clayton that ended up in A Little Devil in America. And what is, I think the real question is, have I pushed my curiosity or obsession with this as far as I can? And so that's kind of what I'm beholden to. And I'm less beholden to form or genre. And it's more of, like, I remember I drafted that poem, and through the editing of that poem, I realized, gosh, I just have so much more to say, but it doesn't need to be said here, Some of this is because I have a healthy, sometimes healthy understanding of what it is to finish a piece of writing or not be finished with a piece of writing. And that really helps me to write across genres, because I don't finish a poem, and say, well, that's it. I've mined this topic, or I've mined this idea, or whatever. It's often more of a question of how much further can I push this beyond where I'm at with it, because I'm still excited about it. I'm still interested in it. So that's one thing. Another thing is, I don't know if it's interesting, and I've maybe never thought about it this way, but I don't know if those things make their way into my work as much as my work makes its way into them, because my very broad ecosystem of living is kind of adorned with a kind of nonstop rubbing up against these cultural curiosities and these musical curiosities and these things that kind of propel me from one place to the next, these interests and excitements that propel me from one place to the next. And I think that, when I sit down to write, because my world is always aligned towards those things, I'm always using them as doorways into the larger thing I wish to say. And sometimes they become the only thing I wish to say, and I have to make peace with that as well.
Yeah, no, I love that answer, because there's a lot there to love, but I was talking with somebody about your Tribe Called Quest book and trying to explain that it's not like a biography of a Tribe Called Quest.
Right.
It is, but it isn't. They're jumping off points into your life, and all the different intersections in which Tribe kind of gives you a way in, which is what art does, right? Like that's art. Art is a way to examine yourself and your life and what life is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that was you just did a much better job than I did trying to say, like, that's what we're doing as writers. Of course you're going to write about your own interests. And on the Mary Clayton front, like, I have not been able to listen to that song. I haven't even hardly been the Rolling Stones song that you dissect in the essay. I've hardly even been able to listen to the song at all. And when I can, like, I can't not be haunted by it.
Yeah.
So it's just such a powerful story. So I mean, thank you for writing that too, and chasing that interest, you know, and sharing it with the world. Right.
Definitely. I think I haven't returned to that song much, honestly, since I wrote that piece, because I dissected it so much, and I got all these it's so funny, I got all these alternate versions of it when I was working on that piece. I got, like the vocals only, with the music turned down, and all these like background things, and I got her like multiple versions of her recording her solo version. And so in a way I kind of burned myself out on that song, but I still have a special place in my heart for the version Mary Clayton does on her own, the solo version of it. That to me is like, now that has canonically become what Gimme Shelter is the Mary Clayton solo version.
That's awesome. All right. The second question on this show is usually non-writing oriented. So we kind of already touched on music, which is great because this allows me to ask you a basketball question.
For sure.
So we're both big NBA fans, and the show kind of goes through like some post-production, so it won't air for a little while. So I don't want to ask like who you got or something like that.
Yeah.
Because by the time this is done, like Golden State or somebody will have advanced. So instead, as we record this, we are at that stage where round 2 is ending. Miami has won, for example. Golden State has not. Golden State Memphis is still a classic. We don't know how it ended yet. So that's where we are, viewers. So Hanif, looking back at this point so far, a lot of what we've talked about is music and art and how it helps us kind of see life. What's one thing from these playoffs so far that has been kind of a magnifying glass for you, that just showed you life up close in some kind of moment?
That's such a good question. I'm a Timberwolves fan. I'm a lifelong Timberwolves fan. And one thing that has been fascinating is, I don't know if this has showed me light, but I'm so interested in the sports fan psyche, because I sometimes feel so on the outside of the way, most people enjoy sport, at least now in my adult life, where I was just on the Burn It All Down podcast with Jessica Luther. I love that podcast and they do great work. And I talked about the psychology of the sports fan being kind of tethered to this romantic idea of suffering. And like, obviously I'm an Ohioan, and so many of my homies are Cleveland fans. And so they like embody that shit, like really. And it's, to be clear, I'm not knocking. I mean, they got it honest, they really earned that romanticism. But it's interesting to see a team and its fans go from having no expectations for a long time to having every expectation. And that happened with the Timberwolves in an interesting way this year. I feel like when it happens for most teams, it's like there's something exciting that happens in the preseason, or some lead up to an expectation that's real. But the Timberwolves were like not very good for maybe not the full first act of the season, but for a lot of the first act of the season, they were pretty bad. Or at least like hovering around that lower play-in part. And then they got good, and I don't know. And for me, it was strange because I was like, I don't really know what the catalyst for this. I mean, Finch is a good coach, and maybe the system just started to click. D'Angelo Russell had a better stretch than he'd had, but they just got good. And it was weird to me to see so many fans go from like, it doesn't matter what happens, to, if we don't win in the first round of the playoffs, blow the team up. And that, for me, I now granted, I have to be clear, like the way that they lost some of those games in the first round was just disappointing. There's no way around it. Like the game where they blew like 2 20-point leads, that's just rough. But it's also like what a young team with no experience might do in that situation, Yes, 2 20-point leads is extreme, but I thought a lot was made out of them blowing leads in those playoff games, because it's like, well, one, the Grizzlies are better, first of all. Better team. 2, this is what an inexperienced team that doesn't really know how to win yet does. Yeah. So I think one thing I learned is just kind of and honestly, I think the Pistons might endure this at some point, this idea of like going from very low expectations to, although I think for me, I think they're on a trajectory that'll be more gradual, with expectations just grow and grow and grow, especially depending on if they can nab a couple free agents in the offseason, which I hope they can. I think this is maybe too optimistic. I said this in one of my in a group chat where I talk hoops with some writers. One of the writers in that group chat is the brilliant poet Matthew Olsman, who's from Detroit, and he was like not into this idea, but I was like, I think the Pistons in like 2-3 years can be what the Grizzlies were this year, where people kind of are like, oh, we thought they were good, we didn't know they're this good. I see him taking shape. Like I see the vision in the same way that when the Grizzlies got Ja, and people were like, oh, I don't know how they're gonna build. I saw it. Like I saw, you just get some guys, you know, like I love Brandon Clark. You get a guy like Brandon Clark, you get a guy like Dillon Brooks. It just works, and I feel like the Pistons are kind of on that trajectory. But I say all that to say, yeah, I think a real revelatory thing for me this playoffs has been kind of watching up close the mentality of the sports fan and how it is both endearing and wonderful, but also like steeped in this constant unrealistic expectation. Because if you have unrealistic expectations, then you can rely on that eternal heartbreak. And I normally only witness that from afar. You know, Timberwolves, in most of the teams I root for are not very good. And so mostly I'm witnessing this from afar, but it's been interesting to see it up close.
Oh man, that's a great answer, and thank you for including the Pistons in there as well. I mean, my quick 2 cents is I kind of hope they don't blow up the young core at all. Like, yeah, we obviously get some veterans in there to teach them how to win, but that young core is a lot of fun. And I agree. I see a lot of them. I see them in Minnesota as well, like kind of that same idea, like just add a couple of young guys and, you know, you keep, like in your case, Cat around to develop and become a leader. And next thing you know, you got a winner on your hands. So
yeah, I saw the Pistons play in person 2 times this year. I don't remember the first time, but the first time Cade Cunningham wasn't playing, and then the second time was at the end of the season where he had gotten just like very comfortable. And there's just stuff with him on the floor that you just, you know, you see him play on TV and you get it, like he's smooth, but seeing him up close, I was like, oh, this guy's like, he's for real. He's just kind of like
he sees things that people normally see.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I thought it was so weird. I mean, of course, we don't have to talk about basketball forever. I thought it was so weird when people were so hard on him when he first came back and played those like handful of games where he just wasn't shooting well. It's like, come on, like he can play. Like, this is not a dude who can't play. He just hasn't the game speed. He just hasn't picked up the speed yet. And like watching those games, you could see it. Watching the games, he was always just like a step behind. It was like once he gets the speed of the game, he'll be fine, because it's you know, the thing with the Pistons, I think like it's gonna be probably tough to figure out what to do with Jeremy Grant. But besides that, like, yeah, I don't know. That's the big one. I like Jeremy Grant. I don't know if I want to. I don't know. It feels like I don't fault him for this, because I think a lot of NBA players think like this. I think that he thinks his role is maybe different than what it actually is, which, you know, whatever. Confidence is good, but when he was like, I want to be on a team where I'm the primary scoring option, I was like, well, you're on that team for now, because a couple of years that's not gonna be the case. So figure this shit out.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Oh, this has been an absolute treat. I want to honor your time. I know I told you to take about a half hour, so I don't want to keep you too long here, but this has been fantastic. Thank you for hanging in there too. For the backstory here on the viewers, I think I sent Hanif like 3 or 4 emails over the last like 2 years or something. So
no, I appreciate you circling back. I sometimes, you know, like lose emails and all that.
So oh no, I didn't mean that as a knock on you. I appreciate you being patient. I didn't want to be
I'm glad I was like going through my emails, and I'm glad I peeped it, because this was really great. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And viewers, we'll be back next time. As you know, new episode every Wednesday during the season. And then we've got all the seasons. Previous seasons are all out there on YouTube, so check them all out. And again, Hanif, thank you. Viewers, thank you. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks.